Humankind has a propensity for war. Throughout history, war has changed borders, inflicted unspeakable horrors on innocent populations, and forged memories in the human consciousness that cannot be forgotten. With the advent of and the threat of nuclear weapons, nations are cautious of sending hundreds of thousands of people to their deaths in the name of war. Unfortunately, our ancestors weren't so lucky. In today's Intrigued Minds video, we're going to show you just how unlucky they were. We're going to look at the 10 deadliest battles in history, a description of each, and how many people lost their lives in each conflict. Before we start, just a reminder, if you're interested in early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. How do you define the deadliest battles in history? Our list defines these battles in the order of the number of casualties in each battle, and some of the numbers are truly staggering. If you disagree with our list, please let us know in the comments. Number 10. Fall of Tenochtitlan. The fall of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Empire's capital, was a turning point in the Spanish conquest of the empire. The siege occurred over the course of 75 days in 1521 as a result of significant manipulation of local warring factions and exploitation of pre-existing political tensions by the Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés. Although numerous battles were fought between the Aztec Empire and the Spanish-led coalition, it was the siege of Tenochtitlan that led directly to the collapse of the Aztec civilization. The Aztecs were decimated at the time by a smallpox outbreak, which claimed the lives of many of its leaders. After the siege, as many as 40,000 Aztec corpses were reportedly floating in the waterways or awaiting burial. Almost all of the Aztec elite were dead, and the survivors were mostly young women and young children. Approximately 240,000 people perished in the siege alone, and many more perished in the succeeding wars to subjugate the remains of the indigenous peoples of Central America. Number 9. The Battle of Okinawa. On the 1st of April, 1945, the United States launched a major assault on Okinawa, Japan. The operation, codenamed Operation Iceberg, lasted 82 days and resulted in the deaths of over 75,000 Americans and over 100,000 Japanese troops. The first invasion of Okinawa was the greatest amphibious assault of World War II's Pacific Theater, and the fighting in Okinawa was particularly brutal. The Japanese forces had fortified themselves in tunnels and bunkers, and they engaged in savage combat to the death. The conflict also had a devastating impact on the civilians of Okinawa. More than 150,000 Okinawan citizens were killed or committed suicide to escape capture during the battle. The Imperial Japanese Army used what we now call child soldiers to join the battle and conscripted 1,780 schoolboys between the ages of 14 and 17 to fight. On June 21, 1945, the Battle of Okinawa ended. It was a costly victory for the Americans, but it paved the way for Japan's ultimate surrender. The estimated death toll of this decisive battle is said to be about 242,000. Number 8. The Battle of Shanghai. The Battle of Shanghai was the first major battle between the Japanese Army and the Chinese Republican Army during the Second Sino-Japanese War. It lasted from August 13, 1937 to November 26, 1937, and was one of the largest and deadliest engagements of the entire war, becoming known as the Stalingrad of China. During the Japanese assault, the horrifying might of the Japanese army became apparent. China was unable to prevent the Japanese forces from conquering Shanghai due to Japan's vastly superior air superiority and troop numbers. In spite of its courageous resistance against Japan, China lost this battle. The Chinese depended almost entirely on small-caliber weaponry against Japan's powerful artillery, air, and naval forces. China was only able to defend Shanghai for 3 months because of its valor, obstinacy, and willingness to commit so many lives to its cause. Approximately 400,000 soldiers and civilians perished in this battle. Number 7. The Battle of Budapest. The Siege of Budapest was the 50-day encirclement of the Hungarian capital by Soviet and Romanian troops at the conclusion of World War II. Hungary was eager to end its involvement in World War II by the beginning of 1944, as it had suffered severe damage and fatalities in the war, and the front lines were approaching its borders. As politicians pressed for an end to the fighting, Nazi Germany launched Operation Margarita on March 19, 1944, invading the nation and forcing Hungary to continue the war. On December 26, 1944, the Soviet Army and Romanian Army were able to lay siege to Budapest. As a consequence, over 800,000 people and approximately 100,000 German and Hungarian troops were besieged in the city. Hitler, refusing to sanction a retreat, proclaimed Budapest a fortress city to be defended to the last man. The German and Hungarian armies subsequently suffered heavy casualties. On February 13, 1945, when the Nazis and their allies surrendered, more than 80% of Budapest's buildings were destroyed or damaged, and an estimated 422,000 people were killed. Number 6. The Siege of Chun. During the Chinese Civil War, the People's Liberation Army began a siege campaign against the city of Chun, which was held by opposition nationalist troops. Beginning on May 23, 1948, the People's Liberation Army encircled the nationalist forces in Chun and cut off their air transportation and food supply. The siege lasted for 150 days. The siege was lifted when the People's Liberation Army entered Chun after the capitulation of the nationalist forces. It is estimated that between 150,000 and 330,000 civilians starved during the siege. The communist troops let nationalist soldiers evacuate, but prevented civilians from doing so by force. At the end of this siege, nearly 425,000 people had been killed or died of starvation. Number 5. The Battle of Manila. During World War II, the Battle of Manila was one of the first and bloodiest urban conflicts fought in Asia. The Japanese army had overrun Manila and occupied the city early in the war. Rear Admiral Sanji was tasked with defending Manila to the last man against when American and Philippine forces returned to liberate it, despite the fact that the Japanese had not adequately prepared to devote sufficient resources to defend the city. The battle itself lasted over a month, and it quickly devolved into an almost house-to-house conflict. The American onslaught forced the Japanese forces to choose between capture or certain death. In their rage, Japanese forces would retaliate against civilians who were subjected to some of the cruelest acts of the war. These atrocities are now referred to as the Manila Massacre. Among the atrocities committed against the civilian population were rapes, mass murders, and mutilations. Approximately 500,000 people perished during the Battle of Manila. Number 4. The Battle of Kiev. During World War II, the First Battle of Kiev was the German designation for the operation that ended in a massive encirclement of Soviet forces around Kiev. It is regarded to be the greatest troop encirclement in history. As a part of Operation Barbarossa, the operation lasted from 23rd of August until 26th of September 1941. As German soldiers entered Kiev, armored vehicles equipped with tank guns went from street to street, destroying Soviet fortifications. They were followed by soldiers equipped with flamethrowers and demolition explosives to eliminate any remaining adversaries. The city ultimately capitulated on September 19, 1941, after several days of intense combat. As a parting blow to the Germans, the escaping Russians planted booby traps across the city and remotely detonated them, killing several German officers and other personnel throughout the city. The Battle of Kiev ultimately claimed the lives of over 762,000 people. Number 3. The Siege of Gurganj. In 1221, the Mongols besieged Gurganj during their invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire, had launched a multi-pronged attack on Shah Muhammad II's empire. Genghis sent a contingent headed by 2 of his sons to besiege the old capital of Gurganj in the northwest. The city's location on swampy land in the Amudarya Delta made it difficult to attack. Disagreements between the 2 brothers in charge added to the difficulty of the siege. Eventually, Genghis appointed Ogadai, his 3rd son and future successor, as the siege's sole commander. When the city was finally conquered, it was obliterated in one of history's greatest atrocities. The death toll is thought to exceed 1.2 million people. Number 2. The Battle of Stalingrad. During World War II, the Battle of Stalingrad, which lasted from July 17, 1942 to February 2, 1943, was the successful Soviet defense of the city of Stalingrad in Russia. Russians believe it to be one of the greatest battles of their Great Patriotic War, as it halted the German assault into the Soviet Union and turned the tide of the war in the Allies' favor. Stalingrad, an industrial city that produced weapons and tractors, was a prize in and of itself for the invading German army. The battle exemplified urban warfare with its intense close-quarters action and direct attacks on civilians during airstrikes. Stalingrad was the first time the Nazis publicly admitted that one of their military operations had failed. An estimated 2.5 million people lost their lives as a result of this battle. Staying in Russia, our number 1 when it comes to the number of fatalities is hard to comprehend. Number 1. The Siege of Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad, which lasted 872 days, was one of the bloodiest and most agonizing incidents of World War II. Instead of attacking and seizing the city of Leningrad, the Nazis and their Finnish allies blockaded and bombarded this industrial hub for months. Hundreds of thousands of Leningraders perished as a result of malnutrition, harsh winter weather, and disease, with some of the most desperate resorting to cannibalism to survive. The blockade became one of the longest and most devastating sieges in history, and is arguably the costliest siege in history owing to the number of fatalities sustained over its length. Although it was not considered a war crime at the time, Some historians in the 21st century have characterized it as a genocide because of the systematic starvation and deliberate annihilation of the city's civilian population. It is estimated that 5,500,000 people died during the siege. In 1863, General William T. Sherman is said to have coined the phrase, "War is hell," and looking at the 10 deadliest battles in history, he wasn't wrong. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.